Hello, welcome to GeekAut. It's the fourth episode now,
Yes.
and
Do this for
I'm
a
joined.
long time.
I'm joined today by Alvin,
Hello.
and I'm joined today by Owen,
Hello.
and of course me, Simone. And today we have a few topics. The first one being, oh yeah, what did we do this week? What did you do this week, Alvin?
What did I do this week? Well, most of my time was spent stressing over a deadline, and a bit of time was also spent stressing over a computer that broke down, which I needed
Oh no.
to make it to set deadline. But I emailed with my essay counselor, I guess you could call it, and he reassured me a bit. So, with the help of my girlfriend, my lovely girlfriend Kim, we've been working on the essay. We've been doing some research. I made some progress. And the thing is, like, the guide to the essay is very strict about you have by this day you have to have reached this point. But in actuality, it's not so strict. It's just put in place so that people, like students, they don't delay the essay until like the last month of the finals.
Ah, gotcha.
So
So
what I need to do is show progress, and that's what I'm doing. So after we're done recording and stuff, I'm going to continue with the essay.
okay. Well, what about you, Owen?
Actually, it's kind of the same. I have a bunch of deadlines because my course is fun. It's my I have no problems with what I'm being taught. It's just, and I feel like a lot of the people actually they've said it a lot. There's a lot to take in the space of a few months because they're trying to cram a bunch of semesters together into one semester, like at least a couple years courses into one semester, where we're getting assignments all the time. There doesn't seem to be any like cooperation between the other tutors about when assignments are due and what assignments we should have every compiling it all together. And it's just been it hasn't been fun because we're supposed to be studying for exams as well in January. And we can't really study for exams if we're worried about deadlines for assignments or thinking to ourselves how good we are at essays and stuff. And I feel like I know I know my work's not the best, and I know from hearing other people saying that their work's not the best because they're trying to focus on several things at once. And unlike me, there's a bunch of people as well who have full-time jobs. So they're trying to balance full-time jobs with trying to learn Java, trying to learn about web development, trying to learn about programming, trying to learn about everything. It's not fun, but it seems like it's gonna work out at the end. I've spoken to some people about getting some extensions. Not that I need like major extensions, just to dampen the stress a bit. Because there are just some days where I'll be honest when I've had a bit of a mental breakdown. That's not fun. And I think people have been supportive. Like the student body has been supportive, but also the teachers have been supportive. But it just feels like this course is not well organized, especially for people with full-time jobs like me. I could, if I didn't have the like mental stability I can sometimes have, I could probably do better than I am. But if you're on a full-time job as well and you are taking this course to like improve yourself, that's not going to help matters. So it's not been a fun week. I have tried to cool down with some Overwatch with friends, but besides that, I've just been trying to get work done and get stuff put together. And it's a mixed bag, I think.
Okay. Thank you, Owen. And I guess I'm last. And what I've been doing this week, well, I promise I keep everyone updated about my book, and I'm now done with half the book. There's another 10,000 words waiting. and after that I'm done. So I did that this week. And I also played a lot of Binding of Isaac because I'm trying to get back all the progress I lost. And yeah, I've also been drawing some stuff. We made some progress on our game we're working on. And also some progress on another game project, which I can't talk about because I want to jinx it, but me and Jelly might be able to do some really good in the world. So I'm looking
Cool.
forward to that.
Simone, what would you say is the absolute worst item in Binding of Isaac?
The tick. There's a tick that sucks onto you and makes it unable for you to pick up a trinket. But otherwise, the worst is probably actually there are a few. One, Bob's brain, and BFF. Those are two things because they're bombs, and they can accidentally blow up and hurt you as well as the player. So those are the pickups I try to avoid picking them up, especially BFF, who goes in a zigzag pattern across the screen, and when it hits an enemy it explodes and it also hurts you. So it can become your worst enemy even though it's your BFF.
That sucks.
Yeah, but I feel that is intentional. Otherwise, the pickup I hate the most is probably soy milk, because soy milk reduces your damage to the lowest, but it allows you to shoot in a rapid manner, and it can become incredibly overpowering if, for example, you get soy milk and then a big tier upgrade, which causes the tiers to become huge and powerful. But otherwise, it's not a very good pickup.
So would you say that soy makes you weaker?
So yeah, actually.
Interesting.
Interesting. Are you thinking about the soy boy conspiracy? For those who don't know, the alt-right think that soy makes you more feminine. So these are also the same people who think that onion juice makes you more masculine. They're not the smartest people. Basically, they refuse to eat soy, even though, for example, there's a myth about soy that it causes you to become more feminine, because the myth is that it causes your body to produce more estrogen, which is not true, not even a little bit true. There is absolutely no connection. Actually, most food you ingest doesn't affect your hormone levels in your body. Like, you would need specific drugs to do that. And it's kind of silly to think otherwise. Like, their theory is that the reason why soy makes you more feminine, or like the proof, is that people in Asian countries, especially Japan, can be more feminine, and they attribute this to soy rather than being a cultural difference. For example, Japan wasn't a homophobic country, at least not compared to other societies, until Britain occupied Japan for a few generations. And they basically, when Britain occupied Japan, they started trying to change their society, and there's also included adopting homophobic ideas. But that means that homophobia has not been as ingrained in Japanese culture for as long as it has been in more Christian countries, like countries that adopted Christianity earlier. That's a random history lesson, by the way. So I'm a history teacher today. But yeah, the point being is the soy boy conspiracy is hilarious, and it's not based on any facts. But keep drinking your onion juice.
Yeah, if it makes you feel happy, if it makes you feel like a tough man.
Oh God, it doesn't make him feel happy. God, there's so many hilarious posts like talking about crying and gagging and throwing up, and it's so funny that they keep drinking this terrible onion juice.
Very true.
Yeah, but we do have some other topics for this week. We have about our diagnosis. How did you get your diagnosis, Alwin?
I got my diagnosis after getting tested, which makes sense. But the reason I got myself tested was that I failed my second attempt at college, and I got very frustrated because I didn't know why I wasn't succeeding. I wasn't having problems with the level because normal exams I could get, good grades for, but I had trouble with having a different schedule every semester, and I had trouble with long-term projects. Like for one course, I had to basically write a biography, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. So, after failing it for the second time, I decided that I wanted to know what was quote-unquote wrong with me. And after getting an initial general psychological test, results pointed towards autism. So I was put on a waiting list for the local autism expert center, basically. While I was on the waiting list, I actually went abroad and did some work on the Canary Islands. So that was kind of fun, as a nice intermezzo. And when I came back after 4.5 months, I was off the waiting list. I got tested a bit more. I also got tested for stuff like things that have crossovers, like ADD, which then they say I didn't have, but now I do have it. So what does it say about the testing? But anyway, and that led to the diagnosis of initially Asperger's syndrome, which means it's now part of the autism spectrum disorder, ASD. That's the kind of boring tale of my diagnosis.
How did you get your diagnosis, Owen?
I mean, I've talked about it when we started the show very briefly, but to try and get people back up to speed, I was sort of the cliche how people find out about they're autistic when they're kids, when, you go for a couple years being sort of a quote-unquote normal kid, doing adventurous things or, whatever kids do when they're like 1 or 2 years old. And then my parents sort of realized that I wasn't talking as much by the time I turned 3. So I wasn't doing any actions. I was keeping to myself a bit. And but then, I was starting to develop, like, when I started talking again, one of the things that helped me get talking was television. It's one of my biggest influences, and it's why, if people are like going through the kids TV channel wars, I was a Cartoon Network boy, because that was a big part of my childhood. And I used to watch Looney Tunes and go up to people and ask where Planet X was from the Duck Dodgers cartoon, and just like be very outspoken about stuff. So it came to a point when my parents went to the Maudsley, which is a very famous clinic in London, specializing in special needs diagnosis, or diagnosi, whatever it is. I don't even think that's a word. Then we did some tests, and I think I remember that I was organizing animals into certain places. Like, I was putting cows in one stable and sheep in another, or there was something like that. And just putting things on a line, I guess. And then my parents found out from that me and my twin brother Sean, and I believe Miho as well, because we all got diagnosed, my little brother, we all got autism, or childhood autism is what they called it. And so usually the reaction from some parents might be, oh no, this is bad. But my parents were just like, well, okay, that's good that we know. What do we do? And now some of this might be wrong or inaccurate, because sometimes my memory's not the best, or I hear stuff and then I forget stuff. But essentially what happened was after that, we got put in sort of special schools, to varying degrees, where my brother Sean would jump from a special school to special school for, just how they were treating people, because UK doesn't have the best reputation with that stuff. I went from... Now I always forget how this happens, but I think, like, because I was progressing too well at this school, that they thought they'd try me in a normal second primary school, and that's how I ended up going into mainstream education from there. But my diagnosis is my diagnosis was childhood autism, and it's still kind of one of those things where it's like, what does that even mean? But I found it to mean maybe, and I know I said this before on the first episode, was that maybe you show signs of autistic traits in your childhood, and it's less showing as an adult. But then you find out years later that's sort of a not to say normal side of people with autism, but it's more common than you'd think.
Mm-hmm. I should also mention that I was actually tested in primary school, because I was, even though people could notice I was a quick learner, I was very slow in school, which led to stuff like, lagging behind with certain tasks. So I got tested when I was age, I think, 8 or 10, but the psychologist who took the test came to the conclusion that I was an only child and therefore spoiled, and that my parents tried to put too much information in my head at once, at the same time, and that was what was making me slow, instead of what was actually happening, namely an autistic child going to school to a Montessori school. And for those who don't know, Montessori is a system where there's not a lot of structure. You have like certain tasks you have to do, but it's up to the child to decide in which order they do the tasks. So it's about, making children independent. But if you're an autistic kid and you have no structure, you're just going to daydream a lot, which was what happened to me. So, yeah, I could have been diagnosed a lot sooner, but it didn't happen, unfortunately.
Okay. My story is very, well, it's very basic. Like, there used to be a special treatment place for children called BUP, where I grew up. And I was diagnosed after a few years in therapy by a psychologist specifically educated to diagnose people. And I got my diagnosis after that. It took a few years, and I first got ADHD, and then about a few years later I also got atypical autism.
What does atypical autism even mean? It's a weird term.
It means that I'm quote unquote mostly quote unquote normal. It means that I don't have much issue with my diagnosis. At least by then, it was the lowest form of autism you could get, which I don't even know how you assess, but okay. So I guess I simply didn't have a lot of the issues as overtly as other autistic people had. Like, there's a reason why all of these diagnoses were, all simplified into one diagnosis. Because it was so complicated and convoluted, and now everything is just autism spectrum disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't really, make much sense in how do you tell the degrees, I guess. I mean, the spectrum thing is good, because you can narrow stuff down, but then you can't, it's harder to tell sort of the severity unless it's, very outward. Like, there are things that I can do behavior-wise or cope with that, say, Al couldn't cope with or Simone couldn't cope with, and it's very hard to judge, okay, what sort of side, but, it's like I'm trying to think the best way. It's like a chart, so to speak, where there's some degree higher in one area than another area, but does it mean something's more
Mhm.
successful than another? Does something make more profit than another because they're varying scales? So it's weird that way.
It doesn't matter what your surroundings are or your environment, it's bad, period. But with terms like high and low functioning autism,
Yeah.
the environment is usually a very large contributor to that. So the same person with the same diagnosis, or the same autistic person in a supportive environment might get a quote unquote less severe autistic diagnosis than the same person in a very to them hostile environment.
For me, I think the reason I became quote unquote more normal is because I had a non-autistic twin. Like I tried to copy her as I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
Because my sister had to start walking and talking before I did. Like my mom used to talk about that as a baby. I just slept a lot. Like my sister would crawl around, she would explore, she would do things, but I would just be sleeping all the time and not saying anything, just be quiet. So my mom thought for at the beginning that maybe I'll have a non-speaking child, but then I started slowly walking and talking.
Yeah, my mom told me that I completely skipped the crawling phase. I instantly went from just laying around to walking. And actually, my mom told me that when I was 2, I started discerning letters and numbers from like trams and other public transport. And other mothers would berate her for it because they thought she was pushing me into making those distinctions, but I was actually just doing that on my own.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I actually had a very hard time like talking and writing. I've always had trouble with writing, which is weird because I'm a writer. But like if you took away spell check from me, nothing I write would be understandable. We have another thing we should talk about, and that is treatment, like treatment options. Like it's called ABA, I believe.
Yeah, and it's awful. So, just so you know, and apologies if I'm now taking over hosting duties, but ABA is it's almost well, I'm gonna say it, it's a form of child abuse, basically. And
Absolutely.
we're gonna go into detail. So, if ABA is a trigger for you or abuse is a trigger for you, we'll have timestamps with the beginning and the end of this subject so you know where you need to skip.
So, Alwin, explain to us what is ABA for those who don't know.
ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis, and it was developed in the late 60s, early 70s by a person called Lopez, basically, and it's Lovaas. Apologize. It's Lovaas, and it's a very intensive one-on-one quote-unquote therapy, which starts with children aged 2 or 3 and I'm gonna say this slowly so you can't misunderstand me, 40 hours per week. I'm going to repeat that. ABA thinks it's a good idea to have a 2 or 3-year-old child go through intensive therapy one-on-one without their parents present for 40 hours per week.
That's like a full-time job.
Yep, that's ridiculous. And
Yeah.
the whole goal of ABA is to correct quote-unquote unwanted autistic behavior into quote-unquote normal behavior.
Like, for example, stimming.
Exactly, or not looking people in the eye, or flapping, or not playing correctly.
Or not talking or signing. Like sign language.
Exactly.
God, it's terrifying. Things I've heard about this. Like, they will not let you go home until you're done what you're asked to do. So, and in many cases, they force you. For example, let's say you're stimming. They might actually get someone to take your arms and pull them to your side and refuse you to stim. Like, the violation on these children's bodies and their sense of self is disgusting. It is morally wrong. There's no excuses to ever put a child through this. Like, when I grew up, my mom tried with good intentions, but let's be honest, some of the worst things done in human history was done with the best intentions.
Yep.
So she tried to discipline me into stop being autistic. It didn't work. It actually made my autism, like the way it affected me, even worse, because I was terrified. Because there was a period in my life where my mom beat me. She would beat me if I were like embarrassing her. If I repeated phrases or stimmed, she would slap me across the head.
That's awful, and I'm sorry.
Thank you. It's a long time after that, but like my mom never took responsibility for that, and she still doesn't. But she would try to bully me into stop being autistic, and it didn't work. The only thing that happened was that I became terrified of my mom. There was a period where I was convinced my mom would kill me one day. Not because she was beating me that hard, but because she was so much bigger than me. Like when my mom became mad when I was like 4 or 5 years old, she was a giant. She was a giant person who just came to me and slapped me across the face or over the head, mostly. And at the student home, which I talked about, was it episode 2 or was it pilot?
I think it was the pilot.
It was pilot, yeah. I talked about the terrible student home I used to live in. They had a mantra there that they could teach you to stop being autistic. So they would try to embarrass you to stop being autistic. Like, for example, we had one person there who had anorexia. She would one day refuse to eat a bowl of cereal. So they left the bowl of cereal to stand outside in the open for 4 hours. So it started to smell really bad. Basically, when someone asked, hey, why is it smelling so bad there? They would point to the cereal and say, let's call it Catherine. Ask Catherine why it's standing there. She'll explain. And I tried to publicly shame her into start eating. Like, and that, of course, it didn't work. I mean, come on. Of course it didn't work. But they thought it did. And it would do similar stuff to us autistic people. And try to discipline us into stop being autistic. And it just made everything so much worse because it was humiliating, demeaning, and respectless. And it's like, I can never excuse behaviors like the idea of trying to discipline someone into stop being autistic, because it's caused me so much pain and grief.
Wow, that's rough. Yeah, and I'm now reading more about ABA. What its intended use was to, just like how you train a dog, and literally some of the therapy uses clickers, like make a clicking sound, and then someone has to do a certain behavior, and then if they give the proper behavior, you reward them with candy or a sticker or whatever.
A fucking dog.
Yep. Literally.
It's so dehumanizing.
Yep. But you know, the author of the inventor of this therapy has been quoted as saying that autistics are non-people.
Yeah. He didn't think we were people.
Mm-hmm. So what developed within the therapy was negative reinforcement. And I'm now reading a witness account of someone who did this therapy, and adverse consequences. And I'm going to read this now as it is written, and I'll put it in the description. Punishments, or quote-unquote adverse consequences, as they are called in the industry, could get creative. At this treatment center, we screamed no at children, sprayed water in their face, made them stand up and sit down repeatedly, put them in timeouts, and used what are euphemistically called taste aversions. A taste aversion is what's pictured here, and there's a picture. Vinegar was most common, though we also used wasabi, cayenne pepper, and whatever else we found to be effective. I was told this was the only evidence-based intervention available, and without it children would suffer more. I was told the brutality was necessary. Not until finding the adult autistic community did I learn this was not true. Sometimes when I talk to others in the field about this, I'm told it's not real ABA. That is a bold pack of outrageous lies. Don't believe people who tell you this. It's real. I participated in it. People have trauma because of it. Please stand up against these types of compliance-based interventions. So what this person is saying is that ABA has developed into not only withholding positive reinforcement, but actually giving negative reinforcement, giving punishment, which includes spraying people with wasabi or vinegar.
Like a fucking dog. Like they're animals.
If you spray the dog with wasabi, you'd get arrested.
Yeah, you would. Because wasabi burns. It's dangerous. It can actually destroy your eyesight if you get it in your eye.
Mm-hmm.
It's like... But it's like they are treating these children like they're animals.
Yeah, it's awful, awful, awful.
Yeah. Oh, God.
And there's another post which has more examples, and I won't go very deep into them, but just so listeners know, all these things are considered acceptable within the therapy that's most used with autistic children, because lots of official autism organizations praise this kind of therapy. Okay, I'm going to read out some more. With withholding all rewards unless kids ask for it or earn it, including food, breaks and affection. Not allowing any free time or only very small breaks in 5-hour or 8-hour days. Not recognizing motor apraxia, which may give the appearance an autistic person does not understand a command, when in reality they may not be able to get their body to obey them because they experience a disconnect between their mind and their body, which is dyspraxia. Using verbal prompts, such as quiet hands, nice hands, hands down, and physical prompts to prevent children from stimming. And just so people know, stimming is a repeated motion or something like a repeated activity someone autistic does when they're happy or sad, or the most common form of stimming is flapping. So, and since this therapy is aimed at quote-unquote correcting unwanted behavior, stimming would be unwanted behavior. So someone would be flapping because they're obviously stressed, and it would be then punished by spraying wasabi in their face.
Wow. Yeah, I'm like uncomfortable about the whole thing. Like I think I mentioned this before. My mom runs a dog kennel. She breeds dogs, and so I grew up with dogs and animals, and like the water bottle, the behavior, the ideas, they all reminded me of how we raised dogs, how we made them obedient. And it's just so disturbing to me that someone would willingly let another adult treat their children like dogs. Like, it makes me incredibly uncomfortable and just incredibly disgusted. Well, you've been very quiet, Owen. What do you think about this?
Let's not undermine like how horrific some of these stories are, because they are really, really horrific. It's more just trying to understand the reasons, and the simple reason is they don't think autistic behavior is human. It's inhuman, or not human at all, or like a dog in some of these cases, and that's just all I have to, just try to understand it, and maybe there's no understanding it,
Yeah, and I think that this fits in the pattern where autistic people are seen as a problem for the environment, instead of the environment being a problem for the autistic person. This reminds me of a case. It's a couple of years ago, where a young autistic man was living with his family, and he had very loud verbal tics, like over 100 decibels loud verbal tics, which is, I can imagine that becoming unbearable. You know, imagine living like that. And from what I understand, they tried all different kinds of therapy and nothing worked. So, but what they did is, to me, unacceptable. There's this procedure which is illegal to do with dogs, where if dogs bark a lot, you can have their vocal cords partially cut, so they are not as loud.
That sounds terrifying.
And they had the same procedure done to this man.
What?
Yep. They partially cut his vocal cords so he wouldn't be as loud anymore.
What? You can't do that to a human being.
Now, the thing is, doesn't take away the cause for the tics, because the tics aren't a symptom, they are a response to something. So whatever was causing those verbal tics hasn't been taken away. So he will still be in distress and may find another way to express that distress. This is, as far as I know, how tics work. Aside from all that, it's kind of horrible that a procedure that's deemed too cruel for dogs was seen as an acceptable solution for dealing with the verbal tics of an autistic man.
I cannot forgive someone abusing, because I talked about this in another episode, that a few generations back it was legal to castrate people, like children and young adults. And the people that would be castrated were people who were, autistic, but before autism was a diagnosis. But it was us being castrated. This was done to us because people thought we shouldn't breed because we're quote unquote weird. This happened to my grandmother's sister. A man tried to rape her. She was a helper in his home, and he had her sterilized first because he didn't want her to get pregnant. And he tried to rape her, and she screamed so loud that one of the neighbors broke their way in and saved her. And it's like, growing up hearing this story, I'm incredibly sensitive to anything done to autistic people's bodies and minds, and because it's not okay. We are not going to have a society again where you can castrate your children because you don't think they should have children. If someone did that to me, to my body, they destroyed parts of my body because they felt they had the right to. Like, I would never be able to forgive them. I would never forgive them. It's terrifying.
Yeah, yes it is.
We can do some more lighthearted stuff now.
Yes, please. I mean, these are important topics to talk about, and I'm glad we're bringing it up on this show because people need to...
They need to hear from autistic people.
They need to hear it from us, essentially. They don't need to hear it from...
Next week, you won't be here, Alvin, right?
I won't be here next week because I will be on holiday.
Oh! I have a lighthearted thing to talk about.
Hooray! Party time!
I found the perfect game for Alvin on Twitter.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember?
Yep.
Yeah. I found there's a card game called the Punderdrome, and it's a card game made completely out of puns. And Alvin's girlfriend vetoed the game and said no. Alvin can't buy it.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to purchase Punderdome because Kim doesn't want that game in my house because she suffers enough already from my puns.
I'm going to link it in the description for anyone who wants to check it out. If someone
Sorry, I've also found a game myself. I have to remember the name of it.
Okay.
If you just hold on a second. I have found... So, when I was at the convention a couple weeks ago, a convention I went to, there was a Kickstarter game funded.
Oh.
And it's called Rampunctio. So essentially, I'll read the back of the box. Rampunctio is a pun-ishing party game about making terrible puns. Scenario cards are paired with a topic card, and players compete to create the wittiest, funniest, or simply the most cringiest puns possible. So, from what I got explained by the creators of the game, essentially, you pick a scenario and you pick a topic. So the scenario could be, for example, on the back of the box here is orange doesn't deserve to be a color, discuss. And the topic could involve dogs. So you're supposed to discuss the topic. Or you're supposed to discuss the scenario and make a pun from the topic. And if it's particularly cringy, there's a cringe card which you give. So it's kind of Cards Against Humanity with puns, except like it's more freeform. So you try to get people to cringe, or try to get people to laugh, or like pick you're the best. But if there's a cringe card, you get a cringe card that's worth more points. So it is Irish made, so it's called Rampunctio, and I will give the link. Well, I will provide the link to be included.
If I was rich, I would buy Pandadome for Alvin, and that game too, and the one you mentioned.
Well, you'd have to give it to me in secret, because I don't think both of these games would make it into the house.
We'll hide it under the bed, like other people do with the dirty magazines. But for Alvin, it'll be puns.
No, fun
You'd
books.
have to deliver
What are you doing?
it to me via drone, and I'd pick it up through the window.
Oh yeah, like stealthily, like ninjas, pun ninjas.
Kim just said I don't need any more encouragement, so she's probably right about that.
Probably,
you know.
yeah, probably. But as puntastic as this is,
But that's
Yeah, I won't be here next week, but we're looking for guests.
Yes.
So, but we're still currently working on that. But as soon as we found a guest to replace me, and frankly, I'm irreplaceable, but we'll announce the guest.
yeah. So where can we find you, Alvin?
You can find me on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is @BadAsperger. That's BADASSPERGER.
I'm going to link all those Twitters in the description. Where can we find you, Owen?
you can find me over Twitter at Owen Mason, spelled EOINMASON, all one word, and not OWEN, which Simone somehow included in the podcast last week.
I edited it out.
Well done.
Exposing the podcast secrets.
I am.
Wait, actually, did I say Eon to you last time?
You probably did. I don't remember.
It was eons ago.
Oh, the pun master strikes again.
So glad you're not going to be here next week.
Alright, where can you find me? You can find me at Madame Plumpette on Twitter. And I'm also going to link me in the description, or like to me in the description. And we had a lot of fun this week. And thank you so much for listening.
We discussed. Wait, hold on. We discussed ABA. That's how you're going to end the show. We had a fun time this week. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What a fun show. Yeah, let's wait till next week.
It's going to get very long if we continue talking.
No, I mean, I was just saying that, like, that's how you were ending the show, was going, we had a fun time this week. What a fun show we had. See you next week. Bye.
You want me to end like that?
No.
No, it would be such a sad ending. It's like, hope you have nightmares. Bye.
That's not what I meant. I'm saying don't lie to the audience.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much for listening. And
Thank you.
And it wasn't that fun of a time. Owen is right. But
don't forget, we also have a Twitter and a Facebook.
Yeah, we have a Twitter and Facebook, which is GeekAut Official. And I hope you listen in next time as well. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.